Spartan warrior King Leonidas I came from a family tree so twisted that it even put the Lannisters to shame. When it came time for Leonidas to find a wife, he would take dark inspiration from his ancestors' depraved inclinations. But before we get to that, let's dive into the life of King Leonidas I of Sparta. He's the most legendary warrior king in history. With his 300 brave Spartans behind him, King Leonidas stood against the mighty invading Xerxes and stopped him in his tracks. The story has been told and retold countless times, but how much of what we've heard is true? It turns out there's a lot more to the ruthless Leonidas than what we saw on screen. Leonidas came from the legendary line of Aegean kings. Reaching back centuries, Leonidas and his family claim to be descended from the mythological Heracles. It's a miracle that Leonidas was ever even born. For years, his father, Xerxes, and mother, whose name is lost to history, failed to produce a child. Eventually, the lack of an heir began making the Spartan elites nervous. The ephors, the powerful council of officials who helped rule Sparta, demanded that Xerxes leave Leonidas' mother and take a new wife. This would have changed Greek history as we know it, but Xerxes had a better idea. He deeply loved his first wife, but he knew the ephors could be dangerous enemies, so he came up with a compromise. He took a second wife, but stayed married to Leonidas' mother. This pacified the twitchy ephors, but it quickly caused some serious problems in the Spartan court. Almost as soon as Xerxes took a second wife, she bore him a son, Cleomenes. Sparta finally had an heir, and the ephors led up on Xerxes, but the upper echelons of Spartan society rarely stayed calm for long. Not long after the birth of Cleomenes, Xerxes' first wife finally gave birth to a son, Dorius. Suddenly, there were too many heirs to go around, and in a place as ruthless as Sparta, there was no way this was going to end well. By the time that Leonidas was born, he was technically third in line to take the throne upon his father's death. That may seem like a ways off, but this is Sparta we're talking about. Few Spartan men live to old age, and so it should come as no surprise that both of Leonidas' brothers met a grim fate. When Xerxes died, his eldest son, Leonidas' half-brother Cleomenes, took the throne, but not everyone was happy about that. Dorius, the firstborn son of Xerxes' first wife, started his own colony in Africa, but was eventually forced to abandon it. He then tried. Not everyone agreed with him. The people of Sparta near unanimously supported Cleomenes as king, and it made Dorius absolutely furious. Spurned by his own people, the hot-headed Dorius left Sparta in disgust, but only failure and death awaited him outside of his homeland. He tried to start his own colony in Africa, but was eventually forced to abandon it. He then tried to set up shop in Sicily, but he crossed the wrong person and was killed. That left Leonidas with only one older brother, King Cleomenes, but he wouldn't have to wait long before Cleomenes met a similarly dark end. For most of its history, Sparta actually had two kings at any given time. So when Cleomenes was king, he ruled alongside a man named Demaratus, but the two were bitter enemies, and their feud provided the perfect chance for Leonidas to take what was his. Like his brother, Cleomenes was a fierce warrior king, and his rule saw Sparta grow into a powerful and feared city-state. But soon his life took a dark turn. After he was caught plotting against his co-king, the Spartans exiled Cleomenes. He quickly began amassing an army to retake his throne by force, if necessary. The Spartans knew a civil war could tear them apart, so they allowed Cleomenes to return, but once they laid eyes on him, they couldn't believe the man he'd become. According to historical sources, Cleomenes was utterly insane by the time he returned to his homeland. He couldn't be allowed to bring Sparta to ruin, so Leonidas, his own brother, cruelly betrayed him. Just as soon as Cleomenes was back, Leonidas ordered his men to throw his brother in prison. Who knows if it was the insanity or heartbreak at the betrayal, but Cleomenes took his own life soon after. Leonidas took his place as king after Cleomenes' death, something he clearly believed was his right. In one famous story, someone tried to bring him down a peg by sneering, "Except for being king, you are not at all superior to us." Leonidas, however, was having none of it. In a clapback for the ages, Leonidas responded, "But were I not better than you, I should not be king." The guy had confidence, I'll give him that, and he was going to need every ounce of it for what was coming next. Sure, Leonidas had something of a superiority complex, but at least he had the receipts to back it up. While the firstborn sons of Spartan kings were exempt from the ogogi, the brutal Spartan training program, Leonidas was not so lucky. He spent his childhood fighting for his life alongside the rest of the Spartan boys, and he had thrived. When he finally took the throne, he was one of the deadliest men alive, something the Persians would have to learn the hard way. The legend of Leonidas had already started to grow by the time Xerxes marched his massive army into Greece. When the leaders of the Greek city-states gathered to decide who would lead their forces against the Persians, they unanimously selected Leonidas. Soon after, their faith in him would be rewarded at one of the most legendary battles in history. Leonidas accepted command of the Greek forces even after a dark prophecy from the mysterious oracle at Delphi predicted his certain doom. The oracle's grim words presented an ultimatum. If the Persians invaded, either the city of Sparta would be laid to waste, or the Spartans would mourn a dead king. For the Greeks, the oracle was a direct line to the gods, and they took her words extremely seriously. Maybe other men would have wavered, but Leonidas did not fear death. He marched off to face the Persians and see the oracle's prophecy come true. According to the historian Herodotus, the oracle's prophecy might be part of the reason why Leonidas brought so few men to face Xerxes at Thermopylae. Leonidas knew that he was marching his men to their certain doom, so he made a difficult choice to ensure that the Spartan bloodline continued on. He only selected soldiers who had living sons to carry on their name. Xerxes marched his men into Greece at a really inconvenient time for Leonidas and the Spartans. He arrived during the Carnea, an extremely sacred religious festival. The Carnea was so important, in fact, that Spartan law forbade all warfare during the festival. You know it was important if it even made the Spartans stop fighting. Festival or no, the E4s realized that Xerxes' army was not something they could ignore. In an unprecedented move, they allowed Leonidas to leave the Carnea early and take an advance guard to hold Xerxes off, the 300 Spartans. But contrary to what most stories will have you believe, there was much more to Leonidas's army than that. Leonidas really did march out of Sparta with 300 of his finest soldiers. But most stories leave out the 900 helots, or Spartan slaves, they brought with them. Add in the many other Greek soldiers who joined them, and Leonidas's army actually consisted of as many as 7,000 men in total. But hey, I get it. 300 sounds way cooler. While Leonidas commanded a much larger force than we've been led to believe, it was still absolutely tiny in the face of Xerxes' mighty army. We've gone over why Leonidas brought so few men, but some historians believe there's another reason the warrior king left so many good soldiers behind. He figured if the other Greeks saw him confidently marching his minuscule army against Xerxes, they would be shamed into joining the resistance. At Thermopylae, Leonidas fought for all of the Greeks, but if some Spartans had had their way, he wouldn't have been there at all. Sparta is located on the Peloponnese, a large peninsula that's connected to the mainland only by the narrow isthmus of Corinth. Many Spartans thought that Leonidas should set up his defenses at the isthmus, leaving the rest of Greece to the wolves. This idea terrified the other Greek cities that would have been left undefended, but in a shocking move, Leonidas ignored his comrades and agreed to defend Thermopylae. Thermopylae is a mountain pass in central Greece. Its name translates as Hot Gates, and it's the perfect place for a small force to hold off a large army. Unfortunately, it has one fatal flaw, a small treacherous path that leads around the main pass. Locals warned Leonidas about the path, so he left a group of 1,000 Phocian soldiers to guard it. His entire plan rested on those men, but, as he would learn on his last day on Earth, his faith in them was misplaced. While stories paint Xerxes as a cruel, bloodthirsty tyrant, the Persian king at least tried to go the diplomatic route, and, to be honest, his terms sound pretty fair. The Greeks would have still had their freedom. They would simply need to take the title Friends of the Persian People. Xerxes even offered them the chance to settle on land that was far more fertile than what they possessed. If you ask me, that sounds like a sweetheart deal, but Leonidas was cut from a different cloth. When he heard Xerxes' offer, his response was, quite literally, legendary. Leonidas refused Xerxes' offer of friendship, so Xerxes gave him a second offer. He sent Leonidas a simple message: hand over your arms. The Leonidas' response was just as laconic: come and take them. The Zack Snyder movie 300 is filled with cool, quotable one-liners from Leonidas, and it's remarkable how many of them actually come from historical sources. For instance, there's the story that one of Leonidas' soldiers complained that the Persians had so many archers. Their arrows would make it impossible to see the sun. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, Leonidas actually responded, "Won't it be nice, then, if we shall have shade in which to fight them?" While several different ancient sources claim that Xerxes' horde numbered in the millions, modern historians are a little more conservative. It's far more likely that the Persian force was somewhere between 70,000 to 300,000 men. That still means, even at the lowest estimate, the Greeks were outnumbered by 10 to 1. Thermopylae should have been an utter slaughter, a forgettable blip that wouldn't even make the history books. But Leonidas made sure that the battle would be remembered for all time. By all accounts, Xerxes really didn't feel like bothering with the Greeks and their piddling defense force. After first offering them friendship, then telling them to give up their weapons, he waited for a full 4 days in the hopes that Leonidas would come to his senses and flee. Obviously, Xerxes didn't know the kind of man Leonidas was, but when he finally decided to attack, he learned that the hard way. Leonidas didn't just choose the Hot Gates because they had a cool name. The spot where he set up his men had the ocean on one side and sheer impassable cliffs on the other. The only way forward was straight through the Greek army, and on the 5th day, that's exactly where Xerxes sent his tools. Some can only imagine that the Persian army felt rather confident as they stared down the diminutive Greek force. But that confidence did not last long. According to the historian Titius, the first wave of Persians sent in was cut to ribbons, while the Greeks only lost 2 or 3 men in return. Xerxes sent wave after wave of men against Leonidas's formation, and watched in horror as each one was cut to pieces. He'd set up a throne in viewing range of the battle, and sources say that he'd leaped out of his seat 3 times as his men were decimated in front of him. His regular forces were clearly not working, but Xerxes had an ace up his sleeve. The immortals were the most feared group of soldiers in Xerxes's army. They represented the very best that the massive Persian Empire had to offer. After his regular troops failed, Xerxes unleashed the immortals on Leonidas, and the Spartans fought them off with ease. The immortals were lethal, but they were no match for the Greeks. The Persian king endured this slaughter for 2 full days. By the end of the 2nd day, 10,000 of his men, including his own 2 brothers, lay dead on the battlefield. If this had continued for much longer, maybe Xerxes would have abandoned his invasion. But then, a single Greek man wandered into the Persian camp and whispered into the king's ear. The Greek who had entered Xerxes's camp was named Ephialtes, and there's a reason his name came to mean nightmare in Greek soon after. Though the 300 movie made him out to be a deformed outcast Spartan, in reality, his motivation was much simpler. Greed. Ephialtes assumed the Persians would make him rich if he betrayed his homeland, and he did just that. Ephialtes told Xerxes about the secret path through the mountains, and he personally led the Persian forces behind Leonidas and his men. But don't worry, Leonidas left that group of Phocian soldiers to protect their flank, right? Well, let's just say that didn't exactly go as planned. When the Phocians saw the Persian army approaching through the hidden path, they quickly formed into a defensive position. They assumed the bloodthirsty Persians would throw themselves against their shields, but the Phocians made a fatal error. In forming their huddle, they left the path to Leonidas completely clear. The Persian army shot a couple of straight arrows towards the Phocians, then just kept on marching towards the main Greek force. Whoops, that is the epitome of, you had one job. Leonidas learned he'd been outflanked at dawn on the 7th day. He called an emergency war council and made a shocking decision. He sent the vast majority of the Greek forces home. Though Leonidas and the other Spartans would never retreat, he realized that their cause was lost, and that the remaining Greeks were better off living to fight another day. But not Leonidas. He knew death was certain, but he and his men stayed anyway, following the Spartan maxim, come back with your shield or on it. So this is where the legendary story of the 300 Spartans standing alone against a massive Persian army comes from. Right? Nope. Even after Leonidas told the rest of the Greeks to stay home, the men from Thespia were similarly unafraid. They refused to abandon the Spartans, and 700 of them stood alongside Leonidas when their chilling fate came later that day. Leonidas's last stand wasn't just a matter of honor and pride. By staying to fight the Persian cavalry, Leonidas and his men sacrificed themselves so that the remaining Greek forces would have time to escape. Many of the men who escaped Thermopylae would be there when the Greeks finally repelled Xerxes once and for all. Like the Thespians, a force of 400 Thebans also stayed behind to face the Persians, but they weren't quite as proud as their allies. While every last Spartan and Thespian was cut down in the Persians' final assault, the Thebans said, "Screw this," and surrendered. Leonidas finally met his end during the final Persian assault, shot down by Persian archers. Once the king was dead, the two sides began feverishly fighting to claim his corpse. The Spartans, in a valiant final effort, managed to take possession of their king's body, but it was all for naught. Eventually, every last remaining Spartan joined Leonidas, and the Persians got their hands on the king's remains. The Persian soldiers immediately brought Leonidas's body before Xerxes, who had a disturbing plan for it. For Leonidas, death was only the beginning. Persian customs stated that the remains of enemy leaders should be honored, but Xerxes was not feeling generous when he laid eyes on Leonidas's body. He had just spent 2 days watching this man's tiny army kill swathes of his men, and he was utterly furious. In an act of sacrilege, Xerxes ordered his men to cut off Leonidas's head and mount it on a stake. Then, as if that weren't enough, he had the body crucified. Xerxes tried his best to humiliate and disrespect Leonidas's remains, but he couldn't stop the Spartan king's legend from growing. Almost as soon as Leonidas was dead, Sparta began worshipping him as a hero. His legacy was such that the Spartans actually managed to bring his remains back home a full 40 years after the battle, where they buried him with full honors. The cult of Leonidas persisted for centuries after his death. But even with all this glory, we can't forget his twisted family tree. Though his mother's name is lost to history, we know one disturbing fact about her. She was his father's niece. As if that wasn't bad enough, when it came time for Leonidas to find a wife, he would take dark inspiration from his father. While Leonidas's older brothers Cleomenes and Darius utterly hated each other, no historical source mentions how Leonidas himself felt about his kin. He couldn't have hated Cleomenes that much, though, because he ended up marrying his daughter, the beautiful Gorgos. That's right, just like his daddy, Leonidas married his own niece. As for his heroic last stand against the Persians, you can actually visit Thermopylae today. If you do, you'll find a statue of a lion standing where Leonidas made his last stand. The stone beast bears a simple inscription inscribed in Greek. Come and take them. If you enjoyed learning about the fascinating life of King Leonidas III, don't forget to like and subscribe for more awesome content.